Here you go, decaf hibiscus.
Thanks. All right, so can you talk just a little bit about what you see as most important in this class?
Sure. Well, this is a Foundations of Education class. And the foundation of education is what? Well, I argue that the foundation of education is developing a depth and breadth of understanding. Being educated is founded on achieving a depth and breadth of understanding. If you're developing a depth and breadth of understanding, that shows indications that you're being educated. And if schools are to concern themselves with education, which we would presume they are, schooling would be focused on developing student understanding. That's not to say that there can't be a variety of purposes of schooling. Some people may think that you go to school to get a job or to become an educated citizen. But the necessary aspect behind everything is to ensure that students are developing a depth and breadth of understanding. We could, of course, argue what that understanding should be about, but that's a different question.
So how about teachers? What's their role in all of this then? Most of your students are wanting to become teachers.
Well, a teacher's primary role is to educate. Thus, they must concern themselves with the advancement of student understanding first and foremost. They must concern themselves with educating students. That probably seems blatantly obvious, but when we examine schools, we find that in many ways, the advancement of understanding is overlooked. The institution often demands something of teachers that does not have to do with developing students' depth and breadth of understanding. It may have to do with socializing students in some way, or even indoctrinating students in some types of beliefs. And of course, we are concerned with our students' overall well-being. As teachers, we may feel compelled to address our students' social needs and their emotional needs. But if a teacher is not educating or developing students' depth and breadth of understanding, they're not fulfilling their fundamental role as educator. And as we will find as we work through our course, there are many institutional practices in place that actually hinder a teacher's ability to address students' understanding. But even when that's the case, even when teachers face institutional or political obstacles, many still find a way to shift the focus towards student understanding. You'll find that good teachers are highly attuned to the way students achieve understanding. Teachers lacking a sensitivity to the way students come to understand are mediocre at best and not fulfilling their responsibility as a teacher. It would be like a chef who has little concern for the flavors of food. He or she might be able to put together a meal by following a recipe, but by not being attuned to the nuances of the experience of eating, the nuances of flavor and taste, they will never rise to the level of head chef. I'm not even sure a good short-order cook would do well disregarding the importance of flavor and taste.
So the foundation of being a chef is to be highly sensitive to flavors and taste, and the actual experience of eating?
Yeah, I am saying that. A chef has to be highly sensitive to flavor and taste, and also to the way people experience food and eating. That is foundational. That's part of what makes a chef a chef. Of course, there are many skills a chef must learn, such as using utensils and cooking equipment, understanding the chemical processes that occur when foods are heated, combining ingredients, and so on. But these skills exist or are in place as a means of satisfying in some way the chef's concern for the experience of eating. I think of fine teachers as exhibiting a sensitivity to understanding and the experience of learning, much like the chef who has a sensitivity to flavors and the experience of eating.
You said that you think that it's important that students educate themselves.
Yes, I do. Yes, think of the chef as an example. The chef embodies a sensitivity to food. They don't just turn on or off their interest depending on whether or not they are in the restaurant. This sensitivity is part of who they are. Invite a chef into your own kitchen and ask them to cook an omelet. Watch and listen. They will demonstrate a concern and sensitivity to even the simplest meal. That's who they are. They are attuned to the nuances of flavors, food, and eating. Similarly, the exceptional teacher is attuned to understanding. They embody the importance of understanding. We sometimes sense it in what we refer to as passion. The teacher embodies a concern for understanding. They can't help but be interested in learning and understanding. That's who they are. Let's say you go over to your friend's house and her mom happens to be a teacher. The next thing you know, your friend's mom is trying to teach you something and you're thinking to yourself, do we have to do school on Saturday? I mean, that's the way it is, right? Importantly, exceptional teachers are also deliberately developing their own understandings as well as their students' understandings.
Is that why you want your students to educate themselves?
If a student doesn't have an interest in becoming educated, and I know many students don't even know how to educate themselves, but if they show little interest in becoming educated, that is, developing a depth and breadth of understanding for themselves, they surely won't do a good job of helping their future students develop understanding. As an example, I can't think of any great coach who didn't have a passion for the game. They may not have been the best players, but they became excellent coaches. Why would we think for a moment that a teacher who exhibited little passion for the development of understanding would ever be an influential teacher? The student who demonstrates to me a curiosity, inquisitiveness, wonderment, a desire to figure things out, asks probing questions, and clarity of thought, shows interest, I can tell that they are on the right track to becoming a fine educator because they are educating themselves. They might not be the best test takers. They might not have the highest GPA, but they will be, because of who they are as learners, good role models for their own future students. They will model what it takes to become educated. Being educated is having a depth and breadth of understanding. My students, by educating themselves, will be able to model how one develops a depth and breadth of understanding.
Can you explain a little bit about the importance of context? You have the story of Bill and Mrs. Jones. That makes a lot of sense. How is this important when we are studying the foundations of education?
Context is hugely important. We've gotten used to going through our lives without examining the context that brings meaning to what we're doing. This is especially important when we're thinking about schools. It's easy to go about our schooling business without ever questioning why we do the things we do or why we have the artifacts we have. We have to get in touch with that background context. It's the way into understanding what's really going on in schools.
So is that why you have the frames, the 4 causal modalities?
The 4 causal modality framework is just one way of helping us organize our thinking and explorations. It's a simple way to remind us that there's more to our schooling activities than any single cause-effect relationship. It helps us to begin to see some of the many influences that are playing out in everything we do. We'll add to our framework and include bodily experiences, but we'll do that later, one step at a time for now. Regardless, once you start perceiving the many influences playing out in every school activity and artifact, you'll never see schooling the same way again.
You used the examples of the sushi restaurant and McDonald's. Is there any reason you used those particular examples, besides the fact that you are especially fond of food?
I did deliberately use those 2 examples. You will notice that the that McDonald's is production-oriented. It has an eye to efficiency. Our modern public schools have much in common with McDonald's, and we're going to see that as we move forward. More tea?
Thanks.